All right, well, welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. We are in the book of Genesis. Last week we finished up Genesis chapter 28. We saw there how Jacob was leaving his home. He was heading out of the promised land. And as he was heading out, he gets to a place and he takes a rest. He goes to sleep for the night. And during that period of time, God comes to him in a dream. And Jacob receives this vision. Very famous dream, Jacob's ladder. And the big picture is that God is transferring. He's transferring the seed promise and the blessings from Isaac now to Jacob. Isaac is getting ready to die. Jacob is going to be the one through whom God is going to use to bring about the Christ, the Messiah, who's going to bless all the nations, all the families of the earth. And Jacob gets this vision, this dream, and in the dream, God says some things to him, but there's a ladder there. And going up and down on the ladder are angels. And the concept there is that God is going to be speaking with and to Jacob in an intimate way. And Jacob is able to speak with God, and God will hear him. God promises that he'll be with him. And when Jacob wakes up from his dream, he promises to give God a tithe, a tenth of all he receives, if God will bring him back to his homeland and keep his promises. Now, God had not asked him to make that kind of oath, but Jacob puts himself under that oath. And then he moves on. And from there, we move into Genesis chapter 29. So, if you've got your Bibles with you, let's read, and we will read through and we'll talk about it as we go through this passage here. So Genesis chapter 29, starting at verse 1, it says, "Then Jacob went on his journey, and he came to the land of the people of the east. And he looked, he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well, and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well." All right, so in verses 1 through 3 here, what we see is Jacob has now made it into the land of the east. And as a reminder, we need to remember that many times, not always, but many times, going east is symbolic of going away from God, something along those lines. You remember that Abraham was called out of the east, out of the Ur of the Chaldees. Get away from there. Get out of those people, that place. And I'm going to bring you to the promised land. So he moves east. Now, God is with him. God is with him, right? So moving east doesn't really mean that he's moving away from God, but here Jacob is away from the land. He's away from his people, his family, right? His immediate family, his father, his mother. He's away from his friends. He is away from the promised land. The land that he's in the east is not the promised land. This is not where he will dwell. So he's out of the promised land. He's in a land where there are polytheists, and that is people who worship many, many gods, different gods. Now, of course, the promised land back in Canaan, there were polytheists. There were people around who worshipped different gods in Canaan. But there were also worshipers of the one true God, right? His family. Isaac and the rest of his household would have worshipped the one true God. So just remember, he's out of the land, right? He's out of the promised land, the land that God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and even promised to Jacob. Said he was going to give him the land where his head was when he had that dream back in chapter 28. So he's out of the land. And he's moved east, and he is in the area of the east, the people of the east now. And there's a well there. He spots this well. There's some flocks around this well. It's pointed out. The text points out that the well had a very large stone that covered the mouth of it, and that it was only removed when all of the flocks and all of the people who herded those flocks, all the shepherds were present. And that's because it was very large, which would mean that it was very heavy. It took a lot of people to move the rock away from the mouth of the well. Continuing on in verse 4 says, Jacob said to them, my brothers, where do you come from? Now, he uses a familial term, my brothers. He's not really calling them family. It's a polite way of talking to people. He wants to be friendly with them, so he uses the term my brothers. He says, my brothers, where do you come from? They said, we are from Haran. He said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? They said, we know him. He said to them, is it well with him? They said, it is well. And see, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep. He said, behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go pasture them. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep. Again, this concept, this problem of the covering of the well, that stone, that rock is very heavy. So again, that comes up in the text. Jacob, he speaks with these herdsmen, and he's just finding out where are they from, and they're from Haran. So Jacob's made it. He's headed to Haran. That's where his relatives are from, right? His distant relatives are from. So he wants to ask them, since you're from Haran, do you know Laban? And if you know him, is it well with him? And they answer, absolutely, we know him, and it is well with him. In fact, they point out that one of his daughters is coming out. Now, let's stop for a moment. That's pretty good timing, don't you think? That seems to be pretty convenient, right? This kind of reminds us of Abraham's servant. You'll remember that Abraham sent his servant back to this land to find a wife for his son, Isaac. And when the servant had just gotten into the land, there was a similar meeting that happened. It was very, very quickly, right? The servant was praying, and while he was still praying, he gets this encounter with Rebecca. He gets this encounter with Rebecca. She comes out. You'll remember that. So very similar to what was going on prior. We've got a similar scene going on here. Do you think that God might be involved? Do you think that he might be behind the scenes? I think he is. I think he's behind the scenes, just like he was behind the scenes before. I think that God is working what's called providentially. That is, God is working behind the scenes. He's not working miraculously. There's nothing miraculous about this event. You could say it seems like a coincidence or something, but it's not like the seas parted or the heaven broke open or angels came down or something like that, right? This is not a miraculous event, but this is, we would say, a providential working of God. God is working behind the scenes, and I think he has this encounter for a purpose. So in the midst of that, they say, hey, here comes one of Laban's daughters. She's coming out. And Jacob tells them, hey, guys, it's not time to gather all the flocks in. Why don't you go and water the flocks and then get them out to pasture? Now, I don't know what his motivation is. It does seem a little strange, though. I mean, maybe he wants to have a one-on-one conversation with Rachel, but nevertheless, he says, why don't you guys go out water the flocks, and then take them out where they need to be. The herdman's response to Jacob is that they can't because they have to lift this stone away from the mouth of the well. Again, it's too heavy. So this keeps coming up. This issue of this stone over the watering well. Verses 9 through 12. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now, as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. So here, Jacob sees Rachel. Now, I think there's something more about him seeing her, and I think this will come up again. This will come up again later. He is likely seeing her beauty. He's seeing her outward appearance, and the fact that she's one of his relatives is great. That's part of it. But you remember that he's here for two reasons. Now, the first and the most primary reason is to get away from his brother. His brother wants to kill him. His mother found out about it. She wants to send him off. But the second reason is to get a wife. So he's out this way to escape his brother, but also to get a wife. He's also been traveling for a long time, right? His journey is finally coming to an end, right? He's got to the point where he's made it at least close to Haran, and he's meeting his relatives. So clearly there's a lot of emotion going on with Jacob. I think he sees her beauty. He knows he's out here for a wife. This is also a relative. So he is moved, and he removes the stone from the well. Now, Jacob is a strong man. He moves this stone that others had to wait for more than one person to come. So he moves the stone. Not only that, he waters Laban's flocks. But then he goes and he kisses Rachel and he cries, right? He weeps. He is full of all kinds of emotions. Now, the kiss is not a romantic kiss. This is really just a customary kind of thing. It's kind of like we shake hands at this time in this culture. Kissing someone was very customary. It was how you said hello. It was how you greeted somebody and showed them respect, things of that nature. Now, what does she do? Here, there's this crazy guy, right? I mean, she doesn't know Jacob. It's not like there's really been any kind of introduction. She comes out, she sees all, some of these herdsmen, and here's this stranger or whatever. This stranger is strong. He removes the covering over the well. He waters her flock. Doesn't say he waters the others. They might have gotten watered too, but definitely takes care of Laban's flocks. And then he kisses her, he embraces her, he cries, and he tells her who he is and those kinds of things. Now, she's got to be a bit overwhelmed too. If that were you, how would you feel? A little overwhelmed. Now, what does she do? She runs back home. She runs and she tells her father. Again, a little shocking, but also very, very customary, right? For somebody who she knows, this is a relative. I need to go tell my father about this because likely he's coming to visit us, right? This is a relative. So they're going to show some hospitality. So they need to make plans in order to show Jacob hospitality. Very similar again to what happened before with Abraham's servant and Rebekah. You'll remember that happened before. So here you've got Jacob and Rachel, but very similar events. You'll notice there's some similar events that happen in a number of people's lives or in the lives of groups of people things of that nature. So you can look back at Abraham's life, you can look back at Isaac's life, and you can look at Jacob's life. You can see some similarities. You can see that some people did some same things, or situations worked out very similarly. So again, that's what we have here. Verse 13 says, as soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him. Notice here he's kissing Jacob, right? Laban's kissing Jacob. So we know this is not romantic. This is cultural. He kissed him and he brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him a month. So what happens when Laban hears about this? When his daughter comes in, tells him the story, what's Laban thinking? Well, what happened when a man from Abraham's house came years ago seeking a wife? Remember, Laban was involved. Laban was there. You remember thinking back to when Abraham's servant came looking for a wife. He brought gifts, didn't he? And it was pointed out in the text that Laban saw the gifts. He saw the bracelet. He saw the ring. And they ended up getting some financial presents were given last time. So what might Laban be thinking? Well, not only is this a relative of mine, but these are rich relatives. And we know that we have started to see in some of the in the story past about Laban, we've seen a little bit of his character. Remember, Laban is a man who seems to be all about the money, looking at financial gain and things of that nature. It's not unreasonable. I don't think it's unreasonable for us to think, for Laban to think, maybe this visitor is going to bring gifts as well. So, again, it's family. That's great. But this is rich family. And he has entertained visitors from his rich family before. So he might end up with some gifts. That's part of what's going on there. I think that's part of Laban's character. We see that as it continues to unfold. This is the kind of man that he is. But he does offer hospitality. He does. So where does Jacob end up staying? Well, he ends up staying with Laban. And it says that he was there with him for a month. Let's read verses 15 through 20. So 15 says, then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be? Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, I will serve you 7 years for the younger daughter, Rachel. Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. All right, so Jacob's been with Laban for a month. And Laban says, hey, should you be working for me for nothing? Clearly, Jacob's been doing some physical labor, right? He has been working for Laban and yet has been doing it for free. So Laban's gotten Jacob to work for him for a month, free labor for a month. I wonder, though, why it took Laban so long to offer to pay him. The text doesn't say, but a month is kind of a long period of time, especially if after a week or two you realize this guy's sticking around for a while. I'm sure the plan to stay there was probably talked about. So I wonder why it took him so long to offer to pay him. Could maybe somebody mentioned something to him, or who knows? Text doesn't say, but a month is a long time. So Jacob's been working for him for a while. So he says, what do you want? What do you want me to pay you? Clearly Jacob is doing a good job. He wants to keep him on. and he's willing to pay him. And we're told, now in the midst of this, now we're told that Laban has 2 daughters. Leah's the older, and Rachel is the younger. Now, we get a little bit of a description of the 2 daughters as well. Verse 17 says that Leah's eyes were weak. There's something unpleasant or undesirable about Leah's eyes that affects not just her eyes. It seems to be something more than that. It affects her outward beauty. She isn't considered beautiful, or at least as beautiful as her younger sister. Notice that it goes on to say, right after it says that Leah's eyes were weak, it says that Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. There is a comparison between the 2 women. One of them is outwardly beautiful. The other one is not. One is outwardly unpleasant. The other one's beautiful. Now, remember that the outward appearance is often a downfall for people, especially God's people. It's often a downfall. Looking only outwardly is not a good thing. In Genesis chapter 6, it spoke of the sons of God and the daughters of men. The sons of God married the daughters of men, and the reason they did that was because they were beautiful, it says. They were outwardly beautiful. David will commit adultery with a woman because he sees her outward beauty. She's naked and bathing. Clearly, she was attractive, which is why David commits adultery with her. There's an outward beauty. He's looking outwardly. Jesus will talk about the Pharisees who looked outwardly like they were religious. They looked outwardly, now this has nothing to do with women, but outwardly they looked like they were religious. They looked like they were the followers of God, but inwardly full of dead men's bones, right? Jesus said, you're whitewashed tombs. You look good on the outside, but inwardly full of ungodliness. Now it says Jacob loves Rachel. Probably because she's outwardly beautiful. It doesn't say that there's no mention in here of any internal character or morality. The things that are mentioned, you remember, the things that are mentioned are the outward appearance of these 2 ladies. So Jacob loves Rachel. Very likely that it has to do with her outward appearance. She is beautiful. Doesn't say that she's moral. Doesn't seem that he's interested in her inner beauty. You know, what is the inner makings of her? What's her character like? And again, that's why the text points out those differences of the physical appearance of both of these. That's what he's judging these girls on, these women on. And again, what's the application for us? We can do the same thing, can't we? We can judge people. We can judge situations. We can judge all kinds of things outwardly. We look outwardly and we don't think about the spiritual nature of something, or we don't think about the inner character. Somebody's getting ready to marry someone, right? Christian getting ready to marry someone, and they're looking outwardly physical beauty. Quite often, Christians will marry non-Christians. Sometimes it works out. Sometimes the non-Christian draws the Christian away. We have to have, regardless of, we have to be thinking, we have to be looking with spiritual eyes. You remember in the Garden of Eden, when Satan tempts Eve, she looks at the forbidden fruit. She looks at that fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and it looked good. It looked outwardly good. It looked like it was going to be good for food. It looked like it was going to make her wise and all of these things. But what was it really? It was death in a pretty package. Death in a pretty package. You're going to see that over and over again as we go through the scriptures. And I've already mentioned a number of places. We need to have spiritual eyes. We need to be more concerned about inner beauty and inner character and morality and looking at situations and people and things with spiritual eyes so we can discern and not be fooled or swept away by outward appearances. So Jacob is looking at the outward. And Jacob says to Laban, Laban says, what do you want for your wages? You work for me? What do you want? He says, I'll work for you 7 years, but I want to marry Rachel. I want the younger daughter. I want the beautiful daughter. I want the one who looks good. Laban says, well, that works for me, right? Why not, I'll marry her off to you than someone else. Then he says, stay with me. Something about Jacob being with Laban. There's something there. There is a blessing there. Could this have to do with God? I think Laban is seeing there's something, and we're going to see this unfold in detail as the story goes on, but very similar to what ends up happening later on with Joseph. When Joseph gets sold into slavery, and when we get there we'll talk in more detail about it, whatever he does, there's a blessing that goes on there. The people are being blessed. People are getting richer, or whatever it happens to be. There's something with Joseph, and wherever he happens to be, things just prosper. Probably Laban is starting to see this early on. So stay with me. I want these blessings to continue to flow. And again, we're going to see that this is the case. It's going to come out with the story as it continues to unfold, that there's something about this. This goes all the way back to the Abrahamic blessing. And the blessings are passed now along to Jacob. You remember that God said, those who bless you, I will bless them. Those who curse you, I will curse them, right? So being in the presence of, being around, being associated with God's elect brings blessing. And that's true even today. There's a blessing of being around God's elect people. Doesn't mean that it's financial, but there are blessings being connected with the people of God. Verse 20 says that Jacob worked 7 years, but the time flew by, right? It seemed like it was just a couple days. 7 years went by like nothing. I'm sure you've been there as well. I'm sure you've experienced something like that. You go on a great vacation or something, and the time just flies. If you were miserable, the time would drag. But here, the time flies. And everything is looking good for Jacob at this point. Nothing could go wrong. Everything seems to be fine. It's fabulous. He's escaped his brother. He's here. There's a beautiful lady that he's going to be marrying. He's working. He's got a job. No problems, right? Well, we're going to see that there still may be some problems as we go through this text. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. I pray that this study has been a blessing to you, and I just pray that you continue to study and allow these truths that we find to penetrate not just our minds, right? Don't just gain knowledge, but that we might put these truths into practice.